Susan was already there when I reached the Grand. Against the black buildings of Leddersford, her face was fresh and glowing. "Hello, darling." I took both her hands. "Sorry I'm late." "You're very naughty." She squeezed my hands. "I won't go out with you again." She held out her face for a kiss. "I've been longing for that. Aren't I wicked?" "You're the joy of my life," I said, feeling for a moment very old. I took the evening paper from my pocket. "There's a good film at the Odeon, or a mediocre play at the Grand. Or what do you fancy?" She looked at her feet. "Don't be angry with me, but I don't want to go to the pictures, or to the theatre." "Of course I'm not angry. But if we're going for a walk, you'd have to tell me where. I'm a stranger here." "Ooh," she said. "Wicked, wicked. I never said I wanted to go for a walk. There's Benton Woods, though. I have a friend up there. But we needn't see her." She took my arm, holding it tightly as we walked over to the Benton bus stop. The bus had wooden seats. They reminded her of travelling third class on the continent. She chatted in her high, clear voice about Rouen and Paris and Versailles and Rheims and Saint-Malo and Dinan and Montmartre and Montparnasse and the Louvre and the Comédie Française. But I never had the feeling that she was showing off. She hadn't a trace of self-consciousness. She'd been to all these places. They'd interested her very much, and she wanted to tell me all about them. Leddersford is a place where they don't like people who put on airs. To speak standard English is in itself suspect. They call it talking well off. And to talk about holidays abroad is one of the almost infallible marks of the stuck-up, the high and mighty, who are no better than they should be. All the people on the top deck had been listening to Susan, but there were no signs of resentment in their faces. Instead, there was that pleased, indulgent look, that wistful admiration. The princess has come amongst us, close enough for us to touch her if we dared. That I was to become accustomed to everywhere I took her. I've often thought that if I wanted to put paid to communism once and for all, I'd have 100 girls like Susan ride on buses the length and breadth of Great Britain. Benton used to be a pretty little village with a definite character of its own. There was even a local cheese, the Benton Blue. Now the original village, with its grey stone houses clustered round the cobbled market square, has been surrounded by a sort of dermoid cyst of pebble dash and brick and concrete. But the woods are still there, though the black tarmac road, which has been plunged through them, has almost entirely destroyed the pleasurably frightening quietness which all woods ought to possess. Susan took my arm as we walked along the road. We went on into the woods until we came to a hollow in the hillside. As if in obedience to my desire for privacy, the sun began to set at the moment I put my raincoat on the ground and drew Susan down beside me. She held me tightly as we kissed, and I thought of the difference between her and Alice. Alice held me tightly too, but she was fully aware of my body against hers. Susan held me tightly out of a kind of childish abandon. Her embrace was clumsy, like a bad dancer's. "I can't feel you," I said. I unbuttoned her coat and put my arms underneath it, stroking her warm back beneath the thin cashmere of her sweater. Her skirt had ridden above her knees. She pushed it down automatically. She was trembling, as she had done at the party. I laid my hand very lightly on her breast. "Your heart's very loud," I said. "You're not really frightened, are you, pet?" "A little now," she said, in a low voice. I put my hand inside the wide sleeves of her coat and stroked her arms. Her skin was so cool and smooth that I felt grubby and sausage-fingered. Then I put my fingers round her wrist, spanning it easily with little finger and thumb. "What little wrists you have." "Now you're really frightening me," she said happily, "just like little Red Riding Hood and the great big enormous wolf." "But I am a wolf," I said, deepening my voice, and bit her ear. "Ooh," she said. Susan tingle, up and down. Do it again." As I took her roughly into my arms, I felt loneliness come over me, real as the damp churchyard smell of the grass, melancholy as the sound of the beck and the little glen below us. I kissed her hard, putting my tongue between her lips. "I love you," I said. "I've always loved you." "I love you too," she said. I inserted the correct amount of delighted incredulity into my voice. "Do you really, Susan? Honestly and truly? Oh, darling, I can't believe it." As the words came from my lips, I felt that they had nothing to do with me. And they hadn't. A part of me felt a great tenderness for her. She was as trustful as a baby, but the most important part of me was continuing the operation according to plan. She kissed my hands. "They're beautiful, square and strong." "They're wicked hands. When they're with Susan, they always want to go where they've no business to be." "Oh, wicked Joe, wicked hands. So warm, too, warm as hot muffins. Oh, you are wonderful. You're the wonderfulest man in the whole world." I helped her to her feet. She put her cheek against mine, standing on her toes. "Joe, do you really love me?" "You know I do." "How much?" £100,000 worth, I said. £100,000 worth. Hoylake, my boss at the town hall, showed all his dentures in a dazzling smile. "Sit down, won't you, Joe? Cigarette?" The slight unease which had accompanied me into his office evaporated. Obviously he hadn't found out about me and Alice. I had been a little scared of that. Local government officials are by no means free to behave as they like in their spare time. However, I didn't seriously consider the possibility of anything unpleasant happening that morning. I was in far too happy a mood. Good fortune seemed to be following me like a huge, affectionate dog. I'd been going out with Susan about a month now, and the memory of what had happened last night, when babysitting at the stores, still left a haze of pleasure over my common sense. A world that could hold such pleasure, I reasoned, couldn't possibly be unkind to me in the slightest way. "It's a miserable day," I said. Hoylake stopped doodling on his blotter and looked through the window. The sound of the rain filled the room, a sort of rhythmic silence. "You've done remarkably well here, Joe, and I'm most gratified to see that you're acquiring the qualifications to do even better. There's plenty of room for promotion here, you know. People rarely stay for long in Warley. They move on to bigger places. They receive more salary, but it costs them far more to live. They generally are presented with the alternative of either living in a scruffy back street or an expensive suburb. It's much more agreeable here. You can live next door to your work and still be, as it were, in the country. You like it here, don't you?" "Very much. Yeah. You're a sensible young man." He cleared his throat again. It's highly likely that you may resent what I'm going to say to you now. In a sense, you're entitled to." Now it comes, I thought. I kept my face still and expressionless. "What you do in your spare time is your own business, Joe. Within limits, of course, and I needn't tell you what those limits are. Have there been complaints?" He lifted up his hand as if warding off attack. I don't mean that at all, Joe. For heaven's sake, don't misunderstand me. Whatever the limits of decorum are, you haven't, I do assure you, transgressed them." "What's wrong, then?" I looked at him angrily, but his eyes refused to meet mine. "I'm going to tell you what is wrong. Not that there is, properly speaking, anything wrong. Let me put it this way. I'm giving you some advice about living in Warley. You have, I'm sure, some notion of the workings of local government. The most important cog in the machine is, theoretically, the councillor. In practice, however, it is the senior official who runs the show. The councillor can be removed from his post. The official, unless he is dishonest, unbelievably dissolute, or incompetent to the point of idiocy, is absolutely secure. No one can touch him if he does his work properly. If he does his work as well as you do, Joe, no one will attempt to touch him. For their own sakes, not just for his. The official is quite safe. But that is all. Promotion is another thing. Promotion, whatever the head of a department may recommend, is dependent upon a majority vote of the establishment's committee. Then the full council. And as you know, councillors are like sheep. If one powerful personality declares himself unalterably opposed to an official's promotion, the majority will follow him. They'll follow him to curry favour, or because they're indebted to him in some way, or simply because they feel that since the wise councillor so-and-so is against the man, there must be something wrong with him. And, of course, there's always the last resort of offering some solid inducement to anyone likely to upset the plans of our hypothetical councillor. You mean that Councillor Brown? He cut in quickly. I mean nothing of the sort. I'm not discussing Councillor Brown. We'll say that I'm talking in general terms. Imagine me, if you like, as a lecturer at a summer school. Councillor Brown, since you mention his name, is a very wealthy man. He has a great deal of influence. He is also a self-willed man. He is, as you know, the chairman of the establishment's committee. He's an engineer. He likes everything about him to run with the smoothness of first-class machinery. He has his whole life, and the life of all his family, arranged in detail for the next 20 years. If anyone got in his way, he'd be utterly ruthless. After tea that evening, I rang Bob's store. Want a babysitter again tomorrow, Bob? I'm not sure. Wait a minute, Joe. His voice was non-committal. Yeah, you said you did last week. Yeah, of course. I'll have a word with Eva. I waited, my heart beating fast with anger. I knew what was coming. I'm awfully sorry, old man, he said, but Eva invited some friends up. Between you and me, for business reasons. She's been reading those articles on how to help your hubby to success. Personally, I'd rather go out. They're crashing buzz, but there it is. Some other time, eh? The weather's getting warmer now, anyway. He laughed. I seemed to detect a gloating note. Give my love to Sue, he said. And Eva sends hers. Sorry if this has messed up your plans, Joe. That's all right, I said. I hadn't really any plans. When I was younger, I used to go to the Folly. No one else ever visits the spot. Or if they do, they won't bother you. He laughed again. It's hell to be young and passionate in a cold climate. How true, I said. How true. I'll return to the delights of economics now, Bob. Bye-bye. I replaced the phone and went to the window. The ground was shiny with rain. The room was quiet. The Thompsons had gone to the theatre and wouldn't return till late. The fire was burning brightly and smelled faintly aromatic, as it had done the first time I'd been in the room. The quietness hit my sense of time like a commando earbox. I had to pick up the paper to reassure myself of the date. It was as if somehow I would find myself in yesterday with the knowledge that I would have to endure the interview with Hoylake and the phone call to Bob again. Aren't we babysitting? Susan asked. No, I said. They have company. Susan's face puckered up as if she were going to cry, and she stamped her foot. It's horrid of them. They practically promised. We won't be going there again, I said. What do you mean? The bus is coming, I said. We'll have to run for it. We jumped on it as it was going out of the station square and sat down, breathing heavily. Where are we going, Jyoti? Susan asked. The Folly. Ooh, wicked. It's very lonely there. That's why we're going there. I squeezed her hand. Unless you'd rather go to the Flicks. No, truly. She looked at me with shining eyes. It's not cold now, I said. But tell me if you do feel chilly and we'll go home straight away. I won't be cold. Cross my heart. She leaned towards me and whispered, If you love me up, I'll be as warm as toast. Her breath smelled of toothpaste and, better than that, of youth and health. She did not simply look clean. She looked as if she had never been dirty. And the night was clean, too, with a new moon silvering the trees along Eagle Road, and an energetic breeze tidying away the clouds. With Susan beside me, the happenings of yesterday seem absurdly unreal. "Why shan't we be going to Eva's again?" Susan asked. "Don't you know?" "Don't be so inscrutable, darling. If I knew, I wouldn't ask you." "I don't think that your parents like me," I said. "Bob's obeying their orders." She withdrew her hand from mine. "That's a beastly thing to say. As if they were all-powerful tyrants, and Bob danced at their bidding." "Part of it's true, and you can't deny it. Your parents definitely don't approve of me." She put her hand back. "I don't care. They can't stop us. We're not doing anything wrong." We got off the bus at St. Clair Park and walked through the entrance. When we reached the little promontory where the folly stood, I was sweating. I put my raincoat down and we sat on the grass in silence for a moment. Below us we could see the whole of Warley. A cloud passed over the moon, darkening the folly for a moment. I was alive, and felt that the mere fact of my survival was in itself a victory over them. And her parents, and Hoylake, and Bob, and Jack Wales, they were zombies, all of them, and only I was real. "Would you like to come to the civic ball with me?" I asked. "I'm awfully sorry," she said. "I can't." "Why not?" "I'm going with Jack." "I thought you loved me. Do you prefer him and his MG?" "How can you say an awful thing like that to me?" She leapt to her feet in one movement. It was as if anger had plucked her upright. "I don't care about his silly old car. I don't care if you haven't got one either. Mummy invited him to make up the party. She always does. We'll go in the Bentley. We won't even be alone together." She started to weep. "I don't believe that you love me at all." She was hurt. She looked lonely and small. "Don't cry, love. You'll make your eyes red. Cuddle up and stop crying, just to please Joe." I kissed her gently and felt her relax in my arms. "It's horrid at home sometimes," she said between sobs. "They don't talk about you, but I know they don't think we should go about together. They say I'm too young to go about regularly with anyone, but I know that isn't the reason." "Why don't you tell them?" "Joe," she said, "I'm only 19. I'm not trained for anything. They always said there was no need." "I can keep you." "What if we can't get permission to marry?" "Oh, don't worry, sweetheart," I said. "We'll find a way to get married." "They generally give me what I want," she said. "At least Daddy does. They're not unkind, Joe. Truly they're not." Suddenly she threw herself on me, covering my face with kisses. "Oh, God, I do love you so much, you've no idea." "I love you," I said. "I'd like to kiss you all over, every inch of you." "You mightn't like every inch of me," she said. "I would." I put my hand under her skirt. "No, please." "Don't you love me?" "I'd do anything for you, but I'm scared." I rolled away from her. This was how it always ended. And I didn't know whether to be sorry or glad. I lit a cigarette with trembling hands. "Don't you love me any more?" she asked in a small voice. "My God, Susan, don't you know the facts of life yet? I love you too much, that's the trouble. Can't you see?" I held out my hand. "I want you properly. You know what I mean?" "Are you sure, Joe? Quite sure?" "I love you, and I want to marry you, and give you children," I said. The wind blew her hair across my face, soft and black, and smelling of orange water. I wanted it to be longer. I wanted it to cover me and bury me. I wanted to sleep and not to argue, not to lie, not to promise, not to plot my future like a raid over the Ruhr. "I want you to," she said. I dreamt we had a baby last night. He was fair like you. He was laughing all the time, and we were very proud of him. But... oh, never mind. She stroked my hair gently. But what? You'll think I'm silly. I promise I won't. Cross my heart. That's not a heart, Lampton, she said. It's a swinging brick. It's the only one I've got. I tickled her in the ribs, and she struggled, squealing in my arms. I'll tickle you until you tell me. You're cruel, she said. You're very cruel to poor Susan. Tell me. I was thinking, she said in a whisper, that you wouldn't like me when I was having the baby. I rocked her in my arms gently. Silly Susie. A pregnant woman is pleasing unto the Lord. I'd love you all the more. I'd be proud because it was my child. Oh, you are good to me, she said, half crying. You're so kind. I love you so much. That was what I wanted. I applauded my own skill impersonally. The strange thing was that I meant every word of what I said, and it was easy enough to speak them with her firm young body touching mine. But the words were meant for someone else, along with the night, and the new look of Warley under the moon, and the wind, faint again now, as if the grass and the trees and the river down in the valley were breathing on my face. Susan was welcome to all of it, but I had reserved it for someone else a long time ago. I must see you, Alice, I said. Must you really? I'm sorry. I'm sorry about it all. It's taken you a long time to find it out. I can't explain over the phone, I said. I wouldn't have made all that fuss, but... But what? You meant so much to me. I was so happy with you. The words wouldn't come out of the stable from which they pranced so readily to take Susan into a world of fantasy. I knew they were there. They were the groomed and saddled horses waiting to take us away from lies and loneliness. But it wasn't the time yet. I might have found someone else, she said. Oh, God, no. But I wasn't really frightened. I was sure she'd sensed the unspoken words, too. I haven't. I love the cool way you assume that I've just been sitting here waiting for you to crook your little finger. You take too much for granted. All right, then. I suppose I was a fool to expect you to forgive me. Wait. I'll be at the St. Clair, about 9 tomorrow. I must go now. George is coming down. When we met at the St. Clair, it wasn't at all as I imagined it would be. We were alone in the snug. I kissed her briefly on the cheek. She put her hand out to my face and gulped back a tear. It was a noisy snuffle, without grace or artifice, and I found my guts dissolving with pity. I'm so sorry, darling. I didn't mean it. I never meant to hurt you. I'm making a show of myself. I was going to be very sensible. Oh, for Christ's sake, no. Let's get out of here and then we can talk. Once she was in the car, she let herself go. The tears poured down her cheeks unceasingly, leaving 2 parallel streaks in her makeup. I drove as fast as I dared to Sparrow Hill, nearly knocking down a cyclist at the top of St. Clair Road. I saw his white face as he wobbled into the gutter, shaking his fist at us. Lying under the beeches in the gentle darkness, I didn't speak. She kept on crying, burying her face in my chest. There was a dark patch of moisture on my shirt. It doesn't matter now, I said when at last she dried her eyes. There's no need to cry. You know why I made such a fuss, don't you? I'm glad you did, she said. It was horrible when you looked at me as if I were dirt. But I'm glad you cared. I love you. I'm old and I look terrible. You can't possibly. She did look terrible. Every year of her age, even in the darkness. But the words were out now. Our journey had begun. It wasn't a romantic feeling. I had no illusions about her or myself. When we were together, I wasn't lonely. When we were apart, I was lonely. It was as simple as that. "Don't you love me?" I asked her. "Of course I do, you fool. What do you think I was crying for?" She took my hand and put it inside her blouse. "There, honey," she whispered, "like some animal returning home." There was a smell of summer around us, of new green and moist earth. The air up there on the moors was good and clean and sharp. There was no smoke and dirt to make your lungs feel as if they were stuffed with cotton wool. We were part of that, but not violently. We were one happy person, one reality. I wanted to take her then, not because the act itself mattered, but because I wanted to be close to her, to give her something of myself. I put my hand upon her knee. She pushed it away. "Not now." "I'm sorry." "Me too. I wasn't going to come tonight. I always look awful and feel worse. You know how it is." "Fortunately, no." We began to laugh. "I needed to see you so badly, but I hate inflicting myself on you when you couldn't ever inflict yourself upon me. I love you just as much now as ever." She started to cry again. "Oh, God, you're so normal. I do love you for that. I do love you. I do love you." She spoke the next words in a whisper. "I'm so happy with you that I wish I could die now. I wish that I could die now." The next 2 months were, at least when I was with Alice, entirely happy. We stopped being lovers. We became husband and wife. Of course, I always gave her what in our private language we described as a fine piece of china. But that was almost incidental now. The security, the calm, the matter-of-fact tenderness which came from her, that is what was important. That, and talking to each other, and having no dangerous corners or forbidden subjects. We never hid anything from one another. We really talked. Our words were something more than animal noises or counters in a social or financial or sexual game. I continued to take Susan out. I had no hope now of marrying her, but I saw no point in letting her go. She was my weekly shilling on the pools, my selection at random with no hope of winning. And I suppose that to run 2 women at once rather tickled my vanity. And to take her out at all was still a satisfactory way of spitting in the eye of Jack Wales and the rest of them. I didn't really enjoy making love to Susan now. Once she was wound up, so to speak, she never stopped. Even when we were on a bus or in the street, she wanted to hold hands with me, or for me to put my arm round her waist. And when she thought no one was looking, she'd take my hand and press it against her breast. Once the novelty had worn off, it was wearisome. It hadn't the proper end. No matter how deep our intimacies, and in some ways I knew her body better than Alice's, she still stopped short at the crucial moment. If Alice hadn't been my mistress, I'm certain that I would have forced her to give me what I wanted. As it was, she was the sweetmeat I toyed with after the main course. Delicious, pure, light with youth-spun sugar, but unimportant, neither real nor nourishing. Alice knew that I was going about with Susan, but she didn't, to outward appearances, let it bother her. "She's a baby," she said to me once. "You'll soon tire of her. Try not to hurt her, that's all, darling." At the time, her attitude puzzled me. It doesn't now. She was sure that Susan wouldn't marry me, and she was sure that she could hold me. She wasn't going to waste her strength in fits of jealousy. She would simply wait for the inevitable break-up. It happened rather differently than she had anticipated, however. The last evening under the old dispensation I remember as one remembers the party on the eve of the mutiny, the play seen a couple of hours before the earthquake. It was a warm evening, and after supper I left the flat before her as usual. As I came out into the street, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I wheeled round. It was Eva Storr. "You look guilty," she said. What are you doing so far from home? Visiting an old friend. Man or woman? That's telling. There wasn't anything else I could say. I contemplated the invention of an old RAF friend, but lies are always dangerous. Eva put her head on my shoulder for a second. If your friend's male, you should tell him not to use lavender water, she said. And that was why, only 3 days later, I found myself staring at a letter from Susan. I don't want to see you ever again. I didn't listen when people told me about you and her, but now I know that all the time we've been together, you've been making love to her. I'll be going abroad soon, so it's no use you writing or telephoning. You've been very bad to me, and what hurts most is that you were telling lies all the time. I expect you thought that I was too young and silly to make you happy. Perhaps I was, but now I feel grown up. I hope you will be happy and get all the things you want so much. I don't feel angry with you, only sad and hurt, as if someone I loved had died. It was a nicely expressed letter, all things considered. The first I'd had from her or any other woman. In a way, it was a relief. I wasn't obliged any more to spend even that figurative shilling. All my physical and emotional capital could go to Alice. The affair was neatly rounded off. It was rather flattering, too, that I should be the reason for her sadness. Smiling, I opened Charles's letter. How about this holiday in Dorset? I've got the offer of a cottage at Cumley, which is at the head of a little cove near Lulworth. Roy Mason will share expenses with us, and we can have a fortnight's fishing, swimming, drinking, and, I hope, sinful goings-on with the local wenches who, everyone says, are stupid, loving and passionate, and smell of hay and honeysuckle. The only snag is that the place is only available from the 20th of June to the 11th of July, and Roy and I can't get down until the 24th. It's only 4 days we shan't be getting our money's worth for, but it niggles me rather. You said you could get away on the 20th, so if you like to go ahead of us and draw up a list of likely virgins and places of historical interest and so on, the picturesque little residence is all yours. I smiled again. Alice and I had been making vague plans to go away together, even if only for one night. She was going to visit an old friend in London in July. George was going to the continent on business. You've let your tea go cold, Joe, Mrs. Thompson said. I'm thinking about my holidays. She gave me a fresh cup of tea. Everything fixed? Yes, I said. It's odd, but whenever you want something, you get it. When we reached Wool, Alice was asleep on my shoulder. It was almost too hot. We'd had the window open all the way, but it only had the effect of stirring the air like porridge without bringing any fresh oxygen in. I shook Alice gently, and she came to wakefulness slowly, smiling happily at me as her eyes opened. She was wearing a blue dirndl skirt and a white blouse. I helped her to her feet, my hand touching with gratitude the good heaviness of her breast. 4 days, she said, when we were at last in the taxi. 4 whole days. I don't know how I managed to wait for so long. She kissed me regardless of the crowd of holidaymakers around the station. The cottage was lime-washed and thatch-roofed, with 2 front doors next to each other. It had originally been 2 cottages, and its owner had converted it. Standing at the bottom of a steep lane off the main road amongst a wilderness of elders and blackberry bushes, it had a strange atmosphere of self-willed isolation. From beyond the little rise in front, I could hear the faint muttering of the sea. I scooped her off her feet and carried her over the threshold. I dropped her on the sofa in the living room and stood over her, feeling a little dizzy. "You've done it now," she said. "You're compromised." "I don't care," I said. "Have you realized, darling, we're alone? We needn't worry about Elspeth coming in unexpectedly, or Eva spying on us. I don't have to leave you at 10 o'clock. And I can give you some fine china any time I like. What's wrong with right now?" She pulled me down beside her. I accompanied her almost immediately into an agony of pleasure. We sank into a different dimension from which we emerged, shaking and frightened. And it was as if we'd been fused together, melting into each other like amoeba, but violently, like cars crashing head-on. "Christ," she said, "that was almost too wonderful." The word didn't sound like blasphemy, any more than it had done when we were making love. She had said it again and again then, in a breathless amazement, and it was the first time I'd heard her use the word. She turned to me and put her arms around my neck. "I love you, Joe. I love you properly, like a wife. I'd like us to love each other so much that there'd be no need for us to say it. But I want to say it all the time. I love you. I love you like a husband. I'd die for you. Don't talk about death. I'll live for you then. I'll make you the most loved woman in the whole world." "No, just the woman you love most," she sighed. "I could stay here forever." My eyes prickled with tears. "It's real now," I said. "The whole earth solid." She pressed herself harder against me. "Do you like the way I feel? Do you like these? Or are they too old?" "They're perfect. The only ones my head's happy in between." But as I said it, I found myself wishing, for a second, that they were younger. That night, and the nights that followed, I learned all about a woman's body and my own. All that I'll ever know. For now, as far as I'm concerned, there are no more women, only friendly strangers with the appearance and functions of women. Whenever I make love now, I feel as if I were one of the characters in a magazine advertisement. You know the kind. A big room, and everything in it brand new, and lithographers' sunbeams pouring through the window. The girl in the bed is, as they put it in the song, as pink and soft as a nursery. She looks scarcely old enough to be married, but she has a wedding ring to prove it. The husband generally has a smooth monkeyish face, with round eyes and a long upper lip and a few wrinkles on his forehead. The last items are, together with his crew-cut, simple ways of indicating sex. They both look very clean, but too clean, as if they were made of something hard and shiny that could be washed down like bathroom tiles. They need more sleep in their eyes. They need at least a little rumpling and staleness, just as the room needs at least a small crack in the plaster, and a set of false teeth in a glass, and the sunbeams, a suggestion of that dust which, whether we came from it or not, we all eat a speck of before we die. My wife and I aren't exact facsimiles of that couple, of course, but we belong to the same world, and what happens 2 or 3 times a week between the fine linen sheets in the front bedroom of our cosy little cottage off Linnet Road is, I feel sure, exactly what has just happened to the couple in the advertisement. Not that I don't enjoy it. It's decent and wholesome and satisfying. But what Alice and I enjoyed together was something no one else could enjoy. There was no restraint, no shame, no normal or abnormal in that cramped double bed in the room with the dormer window, or lying naked in the little cove nearby, or running through the honeysuckle-heavy woods and the sunken lanes overgrown with trees and bushes into dark, hot tunnels. We stopped smoking. It was part of the heightened perception we shared those 4 days. Anything that would have dulled that perception, or have smothered even the smallest fragment of time, was unthinkable. For although we'd planned a lifetime together, we instinctively behaved as if we were meeting for the last time. She cried all the way into Dorchester. I held her tightly, her face against mine. I remember the smell of her hair, brine and olives and sweat. We hardly spoke. I kept staring outside at the rolling downs, at the wheat that seemed to have the dark glitter of pyrites, at the stretches of heath as theatrically bleak as the farmland was theatrically opulent, taking in great gulps of scenery like brandy against my mounting guilt and emptiness. As we walked into the station, she said suddenly, "I wish you'd kill me." The words were made shocking by her matter-of-fact tone. "Kill you? If you wanted to now, I'd let you." Her colour was patchy under the tan. "You've made me so happy. that I can't imagine living for 1 second without you. I looked straight into her eyes. I love you, Alice. I'll love you till the day I die. You're my wife now. There'll never be anyone else. I'll be with you every inch of the journey. There's nothing more I can say to you, Joe. She started to make up her face briskly and expertly. Do something for me before the train comes, will you, darling? Give me some cigarettes and some matches, and walk away when I board the train. Walk away and don't look back. And think of me all the time. Keep thinking of me. I met Charles and Roy after lunch. Charles was wearing biscuit-coloured linen slacks, white and brown shoes, a bright red shirt, and a white cap with a green visor. Beneath the cap his face was brick red. Roy, a tall, stooping young man who worked at the library in the borough adjacent to Charles, was wearing blue suede shoes, blue linen slacks, an orange T-shirt, and white sunglasses. Both were smoking cigars. "My God," I said, "you look like mad film directors." "That's the idea," Charles said. "A dozen former virgins are now awaiting contracts." "You've not even admired our passion wagon yet," Roy said. It was a pre-war Hudson terraplane with a gangsterish raffishness about it. Charles slapped me on the back and thrust a cigar in my mouth. "Quick one before they close, or a slow wallow at the cottage." "The cottage," I said. I sat beside him in front, and Roy stretched himself out across the back seat. "What's the best speech for swimming, Joe?" Charles asked as we drove along the coast. We were passing the lane which led to the cove where Alice and I had been that morning. It was the best place to swim from. All the other stretches of beach nearby were shingly and exposed, but I couldn't, just then, tolerate the thought of anyone else disturbing my memories of what had taken place there less than 4 hours since. The cove was our own in a way that, I don't know why, the cottage wasn't. "It's 1/2 mile farther," I said, as I drove past the lane. "Hurry up," Charles said impatiently. "The road's clear." I put my foot down and drew up a moment later in a flurry of dust on the narrow road by the headland north of Cumley. There was a path leading down to the beach, and Charles and Roy snatched up their bathing trunks and started running down it. "Aren't you coming, Joe?" Roy asked. "There's a spare costume somewhere." "No, thanks," I said. "I've already bathed." They went whooping down the path like schoolboys, and in scarcely 10 minutes I heard them swearing as their bare feet hit the shingles, and there was a sound of splashing. I took another cigarette from the box in the back seat, pierced it, lit it carefully, and tried to think about nothing at all, stroking the worn bakelite of the steering wheel for comfort. It was a good holiday that we had, though. "Gosh, isn't it hot?" Susan said. We were lying in a clearing in the bracken above the folly. The afternoon sun beat down on us like a pleasurable pain forte dur. "You shouldn't feel hot," I said, looking at her off-the-shoulder blouse and cotton skirt. "You've nothing on." "Wicked," she said, and pulled up the blouse till it covered her shoulders. "Happy now? Joti happy now his Susan back?" I pulled her blouse off her shoulders again. I kissed each shoulder gently. "Happy now. Only happy now I'm with you." Women over 30 look younger at dusk or by candlelight. A girl of 19 looks younger, childish almost, in the hard glare of the midday sun. At that moment, Susan looked no more than 14. Her lipstick had been kissed away, her powder had disappeared. Her lips were still red, her skin flawless. "It was a lovely letter," she said. "Oh, Joe, I was so miserable until I got it. It was the best surprise I've ever had in my whole life." Charles had helped me to write it, after a long argument, in the course of which he'd called me, among other things, a sex-besotted moron and an unsuccessful gigolo. "There now," he said when I signed it. "That should bring the silly little bitch running back with the love light in her eyes. You can always depend on your Uncle Charles." Indeed I could. And there was Susan to prove it. I'd been back from Dorset a week, and she'd only just returned from Cannes. She'd phoned me the minute she read the letter. The sour, smoky smell of the bracken caught at my throat. I raised myself on my elbow and looked down at Warley in the valley below. I could see it all. The town hall with the baskets of flowers above the entrance, the boats on the river at Snow Park, the yellow buses crawling out of the station, the big black finger of Tebbott's Mills in Sebastopol Street, the pulse of traffic in Market Street with its shops whose names I could recite in a litany, Winthrop the jeweller, with the beautiful gold and silver watches that made my own seem cheap, Finlay the tailor with the Dacks and the Vantella shirts and the Jaeger dressing gowns, Priestley the grocer with its smell of cheese and roasting coffee, Robbins the chemist with the bottles of Lawnthric aftershave lotion and the Beaver shaving brushes. I loved it all, right down to the red brick front of the Christadelphian reading room and posters outside the Colosseum and Royal Cinemas. I couldn't leave it, and if I married Alice, I'd be forced to leave it. You can only love a town if it loves you, and Warley would never love a co-respondent. I had to love Warley properly, too. I had to take all she could give me. It was too late to enjoy merely her warm friendship, a life with a grade 6 girl perhaps, a life spent in, if I were lucky, one of the concrete boxes of houses on the new council estate. People could be happy in those little houses with their tiny gardens and one bathroom and no garage. But it wasn't for me. If the worst came to the worst, I would accept it sooner than not live in Warley at all. But I had to force the town into granting me the ultimate intimacy, the power and privilege and luxury which emanated from top. "Joe," said Susan, "you're very naughty. You're not listening." "I am, honey," I said. It wasn't a lovely letter, though. I was too agitated when I wrote it. I was frightened that you'd recognize the writer and throw it away. I haven't had a happy moment since you told me it was all over between us. You promised me never to see Alice again. Have you told her? You know she's in hospital. She's very ill, too. Susan's face was set very hard. She didn't look like a schoolgirl now, but more like one of those female magistrates who are always sending someone to jail without the option, so that no one will be able to accuse them of womanly soft-heartedness. You must tell her now. She looked like her mother. The soft curves of her face seemed to change to straight lines, and her mouth became tight and disciplined, not exactly cruel, but set in an expression of judgment. Alice had come home the day before me, and had been taken to hospital in the middle of the night. I never did find out what the illness was. It wasn't cancer, but it was some kind of internal swelling that was quite serious. Serious enough for an operation, but not serious enough for the doctors to give her the dope necessary to keep away the pain. She was waiting for the operation now, and wasn't allowed any visitors except for family. I hadn't written her because she sent me a note saying that it was wisest not to, but my conscience troubled me about it because I knew that she didn't really expect me to take her at her word. "Do you hear me, Joe?" Susan's voice had a shrill note. "Tell her now. She's not going to die. If you don't write to her straight away, I really have finished with you this time. I mean it." Susan stood up. I took hold of her roughly, then slapped her hard on the face. She gave a little cry of surprise, then flew at me with her nails. I held her off easily. "You're not going," I said, "and I'm not going to do what you asked me either. I love you, you silly bitch, and I'm the one who says what's to be done, now and in the future." "Let me go," she said. "I'll scream for help. You can't make me stay here against my will." She started to struggle. Her black hair was dishevelled and her brown eyes were gleaming with anger, changed into a tigerish topaz. I shook her as hard as I could. I'd done it in play before when she'd asked me to hurt her. Please hurt her. But this time I was in brutal earnest, and when I'd finished, she was breathless and half fainting. Then I kissed her, biting her lip till I tasted blood. Her arms tightened round my neck, and she let herself fall to the ground. This time she did not play the frightened virgin. This time I had no scruples, no horizon but the hot lunacy of my own instincts. "You hurt me," she said when I came to my senses afterwards, my whole body empty and exhausted. "You hurt me, and you took all my clothes. Look, I'm bleeding here, and here, and here. Oh, Joe, I love you with all of me now. Every little bit of me is yours. You won't need her any more, will you?" She laughed. It was a low, gurgling laugh. It was full of physical contentment. "Tell her, when she comes out of hospital, if you like, darling. You won't need her any more. I know that." She smiled at me. The smile radiated an almost savage well-being. "I won't need her any more," I repeated dully. There was a taste of blood in my mouth, and my hand was bleeding where she'd scratched it. The sun was hurting my eyes now, and the bracken round the clearing seemed actually to be growing tall and closing in on me. It was almost 2 months before Alice came out of hospital. The day before, I had a phone call from Brown at the town hall. He rang me direct, with none of the usual secretary nonsense. "Mr. Lampton, lunch at Cotton Club, Leddersford, 1. "Are you sure it's me you want?" I asked. "Of course I'm sure. It's important, too. See you there, on the dot." The Leddersford Conservative Club was a large Italianate building in the centre of the city. I felt a cold excitement. This was the place where the money grew. I gave my name to the commissionaire. "Mr. Lampton." "Yes, sir. Mr. Brown has a luncheon appointment with you. He's been unavoidably delayed, but he asked you to wait in the bar." The bar was crowded with businessmen slaving to help the export drive. I saw Jack Wales on the far side of the bar. "How are you, old man?" "Very fit," I said. "Had a good holiday in Dorset. You seem to be busting with health, I must say." "Been to Mallorca. Cambridge seems a bit damp and chilly after it. I'm just returning there. Made a flying visit to Warley. Papa's rather off colour. Works too hard." "Oh, sorry to hear that," I said, wondering maliciously whether it was gout, prostate trouble, or high blood pressure that was making Wales Senior ill. "He's all right now," he said. He smiled at me. "My father puts in a 16-hour day, you know. Drink, old man?" "Whiskey." "Have a double. Then you don't have to catch the waiter's eye twice. What brings you here, anyway? Thought you were a red-hot Labour man. Seen the light, eh?" He gave one of his hearty false laughs. "I'm meeting Mr. Brown." "Susan's father?" "Uh-huh." "Nice chap. Don't let him overpower you there. Stick out for the highest figure the traffic will bear. I suppose it's a job you're discussing." "Could be," I said. There wasn't anything else I could say. "You're cagey," he said. "Wise man." He looked at the gold watch that seemed effeminately small on his huge, hairy wrist. "Well, I must push off." He finished his whiskey. "Another?" "No, thanks, old man. In any case, you can't buy one. Club rule." He clicked his finger at the waiter. "Double whiskey for Mr. Lampton, Henry." He gave the waiter a note and shoveled the change into his pocket without bothering to count it. "Bye for now, Joe." "Goodbye, Jack." I saw Brown enter the room. He came straight over to me. "Seems to have made yourself at home, young man. Think I'll have one of those whiskies while there's still some left." He crooked his finger, and the waiter glided over to him. "I'm very annoyed with you, young man," he said. He had very heavy black eyebrows, and in conjunction with his grey hair and red face, they were a little alarming. Compressed over his deep-set eyes, the effect was that of a hanging judge. A waiter approached us, and with much bowing and scraping led us to a table in the dining-room. I was taking the first spoonful of game soup when Brown said casually, "I'm thinking of setting you up in business." I nearly choked. "Are you serious?" He scowled. "I didn't bring you here to play jokes. You heard what I said. You can name your figure." "Ah, there's a catch somewhere," I said. "There is. I'll make you a rich man, a damn sight better off than you'll ever be in local government, on one condition." He paused. Suddenly he looked old and sick. "Just one condition. You never see Susan again or communicate with her in any way." "I'm to leave Warley too, I take it?" "Yes, you're to leave Warley too." He wiped his forehead with a white silk handkerchief. "There's no need for you to think twice about it, is there? There's nothing for you if you don't take the offer. In fact, I'll go out of my way to make things unpleasant for you." There was a roaring in my ears. I wanted to knock over the table and hit him until my arm had no more strength in it. Then give him the boot, give him the boot, give him the boot. I drew a deep breath. "No. Definitely no. If you were a younger man, I'd knock you down, by God I would." To my horror, I found my accent growing broader. "I reckon nowt to your bloody rotten offer. I'll dig ditches afore I'll be bought." My voice stopped shaking as I regained my self-control. "Listen, you wouldn't understand, but I love Susan." "I wouldn't understand," he said, dragging out the words. "I wouldn't understand about love." "I'm not in love with her," I said. "I love her. She's absolutely the best girl I've ever met. I wanted to marry her the first moment I saw her. I didn't know who she was then, and I didn't care. Damn it, I'll bring it before the magistrates. She can stay at my home if you throw her out. The magistrates won't refuse us permission to marry, and even if they do, I'll kick up a hell of a row." "You'll do no such thing, Joe," he said quietly. "Why won't I?" "Because you're marrying her. With my consent. Right quick." I looked at him with my mouth open. He'd regained his normal floridity now. He was actually smiling. I could only gape at him. "Finish your soup," he said. "There's many folk who'd be glad of that, and you're letting it grow cold." I spooned it up obediently as a child. He looked at me with a bristling kindliness. Why did you make me that offer?" I asked. "I wanted to be sure you were right for her. Mind you, it would have been a good investment anyway. You're a bright lad." "You've been against us marrying right from the start," I said, "and now you want us to get married quickly. I still can't see why." "The reason's very simple." "Yes, I'm glad you've the grace to blush." "Well, why didn't she tell me?" "She didn't tell you because she didn't want you to wed her just out of a sense of duty. And I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to wed her as a financial proposition. And why the hell should I present you with a gun to hold at my head?" My respect for him increased. And then I was seized with the fact of sharing life, all life, of being in the main current. Everyone talks about the joys of motherhood, but they say very little about the joys of fatherhood, when you feel an immense animal tenderness towards a woman. The Bible puts it exactly right when it talks of your bowels yearning towards someone. "You mean that you'd let her have the baby and say nothing to me?" "I'd sooner have that happen than have her miserable for the rest of her life." "Susan with my son," I said, and smiled. I was dizzy with happiness. It was a happiness as wholesome as honey on the comb. I was a man at last. Instead of having the book snatched from me halfway, I was reading into the next chapter. "I want you to leave Town Hall as soon as you can," he added. "What I need, and need damn quick, is someone to reorganize the office. There's a hell of a lot too much paper. We started during the war when we took everyone we could get hold of, thinking we could always find use for 'em. I'm an engineer. I'm not interested in the administrative side. But I know what we can and what we can't afford." "So I'm to be an efficiency expert?" "Not quite. Don't like those chaps anyway. There's bad blood wherever they are. Alterations have to be made, which are best made by a new man, that's all." "I've a wife and family to support," I said. "How much salary?" 1,000 to begin with. Not at all if you don't make a success of it. You can have one of the firm's cars. There's depots at Leeds and Wakefield you'll be visiting a good deal. It's too good to be true, I said, trying to look keen and modest and boyish. I can't thank you enough. There's just one matter to be cleared up, he said. And if you don't, then it's all off. You've been too bloody long about it already, he scowled. God, you have a nerve. Whenever I think about it, I could break your neck. He fell silent again. After a minute, I could take it no longer. If you tell me what's wrong, I can do something about it, I said. I can't read your mind. Leave off Alice Aysgill. No. Not having my daughter hurt any more. And I'm not having my son-in-law in the divorce courts either. Not on account of an old hooer like her. I finished with her. There's no need for you to use that word. He watched me through narrowed eyes. I use words that fit, Joe. You weren't first young man she slept with. She's notorious for it. I suddenly remembered Eva's crack about her. There's not many likely lads haven't had a bit there. She has a pal, some old totty that lends her a flat. Jack Wales. On a trip over Cologne, the bomb-aimer got a face full of flack. I say a face full because that takes the curse off it somehow. It was actually a bit of metal about 2 inches square that scooped out his eyes and most of his nose. He grunted when it happened. Then he said, "Oh no. Oh no." That is what I said when Brown spoke Jack Wales's name, and pressing his advantage home, went on to give chapter and verse. There was a handshake. There was talk of a contract. There was tolerance. I've been young and daft myself. There was praise. You're the sort of young man we want. There's always room at the top. There was sternness. See her tomorrow and get it done with. I'll not have it put off any more. There was brandy and a cigar. There was a lift back to Warley in the Bentley. And I said yes to everything quite convincingly, to judge from Brown's satisfied expression. But inside, like that sergeant until the morphine silenced him, all that I could say again and again and again was the equivalent of those 2 syllables of shocked incredulity. The month was September, the time 8 o'clock. The weather was unsettled, with the sky mottled with indigo, copper, and tinges of oxblood red. The place was Elspeth's flat. The exact point of space from where I told it was all over was the brown stain on the carpet in the lounge, just by the door into the corridor. I knew that stain well. I'd spilt some cherry brandy there one night before Christmas. By the time I'd finished telling Alice that I didn't love her, I could have drawn a coloured map of it and its surroundings, correct down to the last scroll on the silly little gilt chair next to it. I couldn't bring myself to look at her, and I didn't want to come close to her. I did look at her, of course. Her hands were clenched by her side, and the rouge, which she had so carefully applied, stood out in 2 patches on her cheeks. "So you finish with me, Joe?" Her lips scarcely moved, and she was breathing very quickly. "I love Susan." "That's very sensible of you." "There's no need to be bitter." "I'm not bitter, only surprised. How quickly you've changed. How long is it since you—" She described everything we'd done together in Dorset, using the simplest Anglo-Saxon words and talking with a cool, dry detachment. "It hasn't left any mark on you, has it? It was only our bodies that did these things. Your young one and my old one, that's well past its best. Why don't you say it, Joe? I'm 34 and she's 19. You want someone young and strong and healthy. I don't mind. I should have expected it anyway. But why in God's name can't you be honest?" "It isn't like that," I said wearily. "I did love you, but I can't now. Let's leave it at that." I couldn't tell her about Jack Wales. It didn't seem important any longer. The knowledge that she'd made love with him of all people in the world, here on the very bed where I'd lain with her, had come between me and sleep all night. But now that I was with her, it didn't matter. It was as dead as yesterday's newspapers. That she had let him make love to her had proved only her contempt for him. She'd used him in an idle hour, as a man might take a quick whiskey when tired and depressed, and forgotten him. He was a trivial detail of a past era, dead millions of seconds before Joe, just as my own dreary copulations in Dufton and Lincolnshire and Germany had been before Alice. It wasn't wise for us to go on, I said. It would have blown up in our faces anyway. Eva's found out about us, and it's only a matter of time before George does. He's too crafty to be found out himself. I'm going in no mucky divorce courts, and that's flat. I'm not going to be thrown out of Warley either. What would we live on? Her mouth twisted. You're a timid soul, aren't you? I know which side my bread is buttered on. She slumped ungracefully to the nearest chair, shading her eyes as if against some arc lamp of interrogation. There's something else, she said. Why are you holding it back? Scared of hurting me? I'm engaged to Susan, I said. I'm going to work for her father. But that isn't the reason that we've got to call it a day. It's impossible for us to love each other in Warley, and I can't love anyone anywhere else, can't you see? No, she said. I wish you wouldn't lie to me. It's perfectly simple and understandable, and I wish you luck. You needn't dress it up with all this nonsense. Places don't matter. She rose and came over to me. I put my arms around her waist automatically. The hammer inside my head broke into the threshold of pain. It was a crackling, neuralgic ache, but it had no effect upon the tenderness and happiness that visited me when I touched her. There is something else, she said. Please tell me, Joe. That's all I ask. She looked at me as pleadingly as a German child. Belson or no Belson, you gave those skinny little brats your chocolate ration. Truth or no truth, I had to give Alice her self-respect. Susan wasn't the real reason for me ending our affair, but to have made it clear to her that I was leaving her for Warley would have damaged her pride past endurance. So I told her what was, with her body touching mine, a lie, although it wouldn't have been a lie the day before. I heard that Jack Wales was your lover once, I said. She stiffened in my arms. I couldn't bear that. Not him. Anyone else, but not him. Is it true? If she denied it, I think that I would have taken her back. It was like the pound note I dropped on the floor after our quarrel in the winter. Honour, like freedom, is a luxury for those with independent incomes. But there is a limit to dishonour, a sort of plimsoll line of decency which marks the difference between manhood and swinishness. You hate Jack, she said. I'm sorry about that. You needn't, because he doesn't hate you. He doesn't know I'm alive. He didn't when we first met. You hadn't come to Warley then. But he likes you. You've been with him lately? After we quarrelled. The night after. I ran across him in a hotel bar. Why didn't you tell me? It didn't seem important. I never asked you about your past, or present for that matter. We had an agreement about it in case you've forgotten. There was a heavy silence in the room, as if some had seeped in from the long grey corridors outside. There, suddenly, was nothing to say. She was standing with her back to me at the sideboard. The sun had gone down, and I couldn't see her very well, but I think that she had begun to cry. Goodbye, Alice, I said. Thank you for everything. She didn't answer, and I went out very quietly. as from a sick room. Drinking my morning tea at the town hall the next day, I felt very pleased with myself. In the first place, the tea was fresh and strong, with 3 lumps of sugar and just the amount of milk that I like. The town hall atmosphere seemed all the more pleasant to me because I was going to leave it. My soon-to-be former colleague, Teddy Soames, entered. "Heard that you had lunch with Brown on Wednesday," he said, "leaving us for the lush pastures of private enterprise?" "Eventually." "Mention me, will you? I can fiddle an expense account as well as the next man." "All that I know about fiddling I learned from Mr. Edward Soames, Chief Audit Clerk, Warley, UDC. Will that do?" "Just a job." "Well, Lampton, we'll get our money's worth out of you before you go. Glance through these accounts, will you?" The tone was supposed to be one of mock severity, but it came out vicious. I grinned and tugged my forelock. "Yes, master, right away." He gave me the folder of accounts and a cigarette. "I'll expect a box of Havannas in return." He frowned at me. "You don't seem bothered about Alice Hazegill," he said. "Or hadn't you heard?" "What about her?" "She's dead." Oh, merciful God, I thought. She's committed suicide and left a note blaming me. That's finished it. That's finished me in every possible way. Teddy's eyes were a pale blue, as if all the colour had been drained from them. They were probing my face now. She was a friend of yours, wasn't she?" "A very good friend," I said. "How did she die?" "Ran her car into a wall on Warley Moor. She'd been drinking all night at the Clarendon and the St. Clair. They wouldn't serve her any more at the St. Clair. Damned awful way to die," Teddy added. "I expected it," Joe Lampton said soberly. "She drove like a maniac. It doesn't make it any less tragic, though." I didn't like Joe Lampton. He was a sensible young accountant with a neatly pressed blue suit and stiff white collar. He always said and did the correct thing and never embarrassed anyone with an unseemly display of emotion. Why, he even made a roll in the hay with a pretty little teenager pay dividends. I hated Joe Lampton, but he looked and sounded very sure of himself sitting at my desk in my skin. He'd come to stay. This was no flying visit. "Alice wasn't perfect," Joe Lampton said. "But who is? She was a jolly good sort, and I'm going to miss her very much." He shook his handsome, dignified head slowly. That meant that a moral exordium was on its way. "I enjoy a drink myself, but no one in charge of a car should be allowed into a pub. It's lucky she's killed only herself. My God, only yesterday she was alive and cheerful, and then, all in a second—" "A second?" Teddy said. "She was still alive when the ambulance came. She didn't die till 8 a.m. "Jesus Christ," I said. "Jesus Christ." I turned on Teddy fiercely. "Who told you? Who told you?" "My cousin works at Warley Hospital," he said. "Turned me up a bit when I heard about it. She was crawling round the road when a farm labourer found her. She was scalped and the steering column—" I half ran out of the office and went into the lavatory. I locked the door and sat in the WC seat with my head between my hands. Those gentle, loving hands that had so often caressed what was, because of the treachery in the brain in the head between the hands, a lump of raw meat with the bones sticking through. At 12 o'clock I told Teddy that I was sick. I don't know what I did till then. I hope that I had at least the decency to make a lot of mistakes checking the accounts. I stood about at the station end of Market Street for about 10 minutes, then caught a bus to Leddersford. When the bus reached Leddersford, I went into the first pub that I saw. I went on drinking until 5 minutes to 3. I went into a cafe and ate a plateful of fish and chips, bread and butter, 2 queer-tasting cream cakes. That was the time the confectioners were using blood plasma and liquid paraffin, and a strawberry ice. Then I drank a pot of mahogany-coloured Indian tea. When I finished my 3rd cigarette, and there wasn't a drop of tea left in the pot, I looked at my watch and saw that it was 6:30. So I paid the bill and strolled into the street. I was pretty well in control of myself by then. and it occurred to me that my becoming hopelessly drunk wasn't going to help anyone, least of all Alice. I'd go home, for Warley, after all, was my home. I'd chosen it myself, and go to bed with a hot water bottle and a couple of aspirins. I wasn't Alice's keeper. Let George take over whatever guilt there was to bear. Then I saw Elspeth. She stood in my path, a hennaed-hair, tightly corseted old woman swaying slightly on her 3-inch heels. I had never seen her look such a wreck. Her face was so bedizened with powder rouge and lipstick, all in shades meant for the stage, that only her red-rimmed eyes were human. "You pig," she said. "You low, rotten pimp. You murdering little—" She glared up at me. "Ponce, are you happy now, you bastard? Got rid of her nicely, didn't you?" "Let me go," I said. "I didn't want her to die." She spat in my face. "You can't punish me anymore," I said. "I'll punish myself. Now, for Christ's sake, leave me alone. Leave us both alone." Her face changed. Tears began to furrow the makeup. She put her skinny hand on mine. It was dry and hot. "I phoned this morning and they told me," she said. "I knew what had happened. Oh, Joe, how could you do it? She loved you so much, Joe, how could you do it?" I shook off her hand and walked off quickly. She made no attempt to follow me, but stood looking sadly at me like a young wife watching a troopship leave harbour. There was nothing else to do but go into the nearest pub. I drank steadily, beer, shorts, anything, until they threw me out at closing time. I walked around until I found a taxi rank. It took a great deal of finding. Then I found myself falling. There was a kind of exhilaration about it. I imagined a mattress below me to break my fall, to bounce away from, higher and higher into the sky. There was only the pavement, the cold stone that I wanted to lie upon, to kiss, to sleep with my face against. I struggled up to my feet when I heard a car stop beside me, holding on to a lamp standard. "Time for you to come home, Joe." I turned. It was Bob's store. "I have no home." "Yes, you have. We've all been worrying about you." He took my arm. Eva came out of the car and took my other arm. As soon as she came, I let myself be taken quietly. But I still insisted that I had no home. I sat in the back with her. I was trembling with cold, and she put a rug over my knees. "My God," she said, "what have you been up to? There have been search parties out all over Yorkshire for you. The Thompsons are nearly off their heads with worry." "Susan," I said. "What about Susan?" "Phew, you are pie-eyed, aren't you?" Eva said. "She went to London for a wedding dress this morning. Had you forgotten?" "Leave him alone," Bob said. "He's had enough for one day." "I murdered Alice," I said, and began to cry. "Don't talk rubbish," Bob said. "Everyone knows that I killed her, as the Thompsons too." "The Thompsons knew that she was your mistress," Bob said. "They know what young men are like. They don't blame you. Nobody does." The car was climbing the eastern heights of the city now, away from the smoke and the dirt and the black fingernails scrabbling the pavement, and the sad, lost faces that had tried to keep up with me. The engine purred smoothly, as it would have done if Alice had been beside me instead of Eva, as it would have done if Bob had suddenly grown talons and horns, as it would have done if the world were due to end in 5 minutes. I went on crying, as if the tears would blur the image of Alice crawling around the Corby Road on her hands and knees, as if they would drown her first shrill screams and her last delirious moans. "Oh, God," I said. "I did kill her. I wasn't there, but I killed her." Eva drew my head onto her breast. "Poor darling, you mustn't take on so. You don't see it now, but it was all for the best. She'd have ruined your whole life. Nobody blames you, love. Nobody blames you." I pulled myself away from her abruptly. "Oh, my God," I said. "That's the trouble.